There is something truly awe-inspiring about thunder. You can feel it course through you, rising up from the rumbling of the earth beneath your feet, like the approach of a herd of horses or the wheels of a chariot. The accompanied lightning was seen as the most powerful force in nature, able to overcome anything it struck. In Germanic tradition, the god who wields his power is known as Thor, Dunr, or Thunor, all stemming from the Proto-Germanic Thunras, meaning the Thunderer. But what does it mean to be the Thunderer? What was believed of him by the ancient Germanic peoples? What do his surviving myths really mean, and how does he relate to other European gods? This we will explore as the god clears the clouds of obscuring darkness from our minds, bestowing clarity on this much-known but less frequently contemplated god, the protector of Middle-earth, the defender of man. Hi friends, I'm Kevin McLean. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and consider supporting the channel through Patreon, PayPal, or now directly through YouTube. Your support helps me to make in-depth videos like this. Much thanks to all of my supporters. Thor's name comes from Proto-Germanic Thunras, meaning the Thunderer, yet he is also called by a number of other names. Atli, meaning violent, Bjorn, bear, and Harðhugður, fierce spirit. These refer to his warrior nature, as well as the expression of the thunder and lightning which he controls. He is called Enriði, the lone rider, Hlorriði, the loud rider. He is sometimes called Wagon Master, he who rides through the sky either on horseback or in a cart or chariot, causing thunder. He is often called Ver, meaning something like Holy Guardian. It refers to Thor's very important aspect as the defender of man against the destructive forces of the Jotnar. Of all the gods, it is Thor who is thought to have power against them. In myths, even the gods call upon Thor in order to banish undesired Jotnar. He is also several times referred to as a helmsman of ships, possibly referring to his control over the winds that drive boats. And we see in myths that Thor is often connected with boats and the sea. In kennings, he is also called an archer, or a mighty archer. Though he wields a short-shafted hammer in surviving myths, that hammer is actually a projectile. It is almost always thrown. Just as Slavic Perun was sometimes pictured shooting lightning arrows, by some in more archaic times, Thor may have been thought to shoot arrows as opposed to throwing a hammer. But why does Thor use a hammer like some baddie in Super Mario? The origin of the word hammer is by most considered to be derived from Indo-European hekmo, meaning stone. The same word is believed to have given rise to the word heaven. In the most ancient times, likely before the Germanic language had even begun to develop out of Proto-Indo-European, Thor's hammer was in fact a stone. Of course, ancient hammers were just stones, sometimes affixed to wooden handles, which is the reason for the etymology of the tool. This feature is not exclusive to Thor, though. Jupiter is connected to stones. Gaelic Lugh famously slays Balor with a stone, and Zeus upon birth was exchanged for a stone by his mother. The Moldovan Chronicle gives a description of a statue of Perun, the Slavic god, which lends strong support to this theory. Their great idol, named Perun, was raised in the likeness of a man. His body was cast of silver, his ears of gold, the legs of iron, and in his hands he held a stone like a thunderbolt, adorned with rubies and carbuncles, that is, stones like fire. That the thunder god's weapon was originally a stone is likely the case across Indo-European mythology. Vedic Indra uses the Vajra, which also means diamond, coming from a Proto-Indo-Iranian word meaning strong or hard. Later, this is used for weapons such as maces, but also adopted into Proto-Finnic as a word for hammer. Very archaically, such weapons as hammers, axes, and maces were simply made of stones. Even into the Bronze Age, some hammers, axes, and arrowheads were still being made of stone, but by the Iron Age, the connection between the god and the stone becomes fossilized in etymology and mythical themes as the importance of the stone weapon wanes. In Gaelic traditions, the stone weapon is continued in the form of the sling bullet, and some classical Greek depictions of Zeus also show him launching his lightning bolt using a sling, suggesting that even at that time, some artists pictured it as a stone. The primary reason the thunder god uses a stone is because of the ancient knowledge of fire obtained from the stone. Flint was used to create sparks to light fires. And once when I was throwing stones as a child, I was very surprised when I saw sparks fly when my stone struck another stone. Now, to the mind of the ancients, these sparks flying from the cast stone are like the lightning bolts that flash down from the sky when the thunder god casts his stone at the cloud demons. This is why Thor's hammer is thrown and why it's called Mjolnir, almost certainly cognate with Russian Molnia and Welsh Mest, meaning lightning. So Thor is actually a ranged warrior, launching his ultimate weapon from afar. One common misconception of Thor's hammer is that it possesses the power to revive the dead. This idea comes from a description of Thor's hallowing of the bones of his consumed goats in the morning with his hammer, and them being restored to life. This is actually a power of the goats themselves. The tale simply has Thor activate this power through a ritual. The actual powers of the hammer are described in the tale Skaldskaparmal. Then he gave Thor the hammer, and said he would be able to strike as heavily as he liked, whatever the target, and the hammer would not fail, and if he threw it at something, it would never miss, and never fly so far that it would not find its way back to his hand, and if he liked, it was so small that it could be kept inside his shirt. But there was this defect in it, that the end of the hammer was rather short. If the hammer had any quality to revive the dead, it surely would not have escaped mention here, in a section dedicated to describing its abilities. And if Thor was really believed to have the power of resurrection, this would have been a major focus of tales about him and his worship. Odin would have sought him out to revive Baldur, for starters. Another creature, Sarimnir, in the Prose Edda, is called a boar, but is also said to be consumed by the gods and revives every day. This can also be compared to the 6 swine or goats possessed by the Gaelic god Lugh, which revive every morning as long as their bones are not broken, exactly as the goats of Thor. So we see a repeating theme of consumed and reviving animals that has nothing to do with Thor's hammer. The notion that it has a short handle may go all the way back to the Neolithic, when the hammer was an actual stone, often just directly held in the hand. This is also why Thor is thought to require gloves in order to handle it, because at some point, there was simply no handle. He just threw the thunder stone with his hand, just as Zeus casts his bolt, typically pictured as a type of dart, with his hand. An 11th century amulet found in Sweden mentions the hammer, saying, "May Thor protect him with his hammer which came out of the sea." This may correspond to the myth of the dark elves, otherwise called dwarves, who forged his hammer. They dwelt in the underworld, which is sometimes thought of as being beneath the sea. Writing around 1070, Adam of Bremen stated that, "In this temple entirely decked in gold, the people worship the statues of 3 gods in such wise that the mightiest of them, Thor, occupies the throne in the middle of the chamber. Wotan and Frigga have their places on either side. The significance of these gods is as follows. Thor, they say, presides over the air, which governs the thunder and lightning, the winds and rains, fair weather and crops. If plague and famine threaten, a libation is poured to the idol Thor." As one would expect, Thor is the master of weather, and by extension is closely connected to the fate of the crops. Yet what may not be immediately obvious is why he would be sought for aid in the event of a plague. A clue can be found in another pre-Christian prayer to Thor called the Canterbury Charm, an Old Norse charm inserted in the margins of an Anglo-Saxon manuscript. It reads, "Giril wound causer, go now. You are found. May Thor hallow you. Lord of the Trolls, Giril's wound tap against pus in the veins." The Kvinnaby amulet from Sweden provides another example. "And may the lightning hold all evil away from Buffy. May Thor protect him with that hammer which came out of the sea. Flee from evilness. You get nothing from Buffy. The gods are under him and over him." Thor is called upon in cases of illness, wounds, and plagues, because these things are believed to be caused by evil spirits. And of all the gods, it is Thor and his power of the lightning which can banish evil. This is the same for all Indo-European gods of thunder and lightning, but it is the almost exclusive domain and focus of Thor in myth, and a significant part of his actual worship, such that his relation to crops, combat, or even the weather can almost be looked upon as secondary aspects. Ancient peoples believed that the world was full of harmful spirits, and that they were responsible for all sorts of ills, from droughts and plagues to bad luck and mental afflictions. A medieval annals entry from Ireland recalls that a great plague was ravaging the country, killing thousands upon thousands of people. The god Oengus mac Og revealed that it was caused by an army of Fomorians, akin to Norse trolls, coming out of the north. It was the power of Thor that could repel these evil spirits, and that power was derived from his command over the lightning bolt, which was believed by all Indo-European traditions to have the power to thwart evil. This power is known as hallowing, to make holy, the root of which is whole. The power of Thor was called upon daily by ancient people. He was called on to hallow construction sites to drive off trolls that might have caused a flaw in the building. He hallowed weddings so that the marriage would begin without negative influence. He hallowed treaties between people with the threat that the violator would not only have the power of lightning turned against him, but would no longer be protected by Thor from the myriad of evil spirits waiting to prey upon him and ruin his life through misfortune and his health through sickness and injury. Fields were ritually hallowed when they were sown to ensure the crops grew rightly. They were hallowed at the first sign of blight with sacrifices to Thor to drive off evil destroying the crops. In many of the situations today when someone might utter a quick prayer for protection when scared in the dark, it was Thor that was called. If someone got cut, Thor was called. If someone started a serious piece of work, Thor was called to protect the home from fire, thieves, sickness, and of course lightning. Thor was called. Suffering from a mental block? Call upon Thor to smash it down and drive out that obstruction. His power influences every aspect of life, from the peasant up to the wealthiest noble, and that power was called upon by everyone. So while Thor is called the Thunderer, we have to understand that this power, expressed most awesomely in the thunderstorm, is something he manifests daily in everyday life. People wore the Hammer of Thor not as a symbol of their faith, but as a talisman of protection. The hammer was a symbol of the hallowing power of the god. This is why Thor's own hammer is said to be able to shrink down to be worn around the neck, so that it was thought of as just like the talisman that his worshippers wore. When one understands this power and its influence, then one understands the widespread worship of Thor and his actual role in daily life, not as a storm god, but as the holy warder, the defender of Middle-earth, and the friend of man, which is how one interacted with him on a daily basis. A more archaic symbol believed to hold the same protective powers as Thor's hammer was the Rosette. It is found on early Iron Age Scandinavian artifacts and right through to the modern era. Some remember it, however, as the Rose of St. Olaf. The symbol can be found on doors to storehouses, protecting them from bad spirits that might enter and ruin the food, on storage barrels, on drinking mugs, and especially on roofs of buildings where a thunderbolt might strike. A later medieval version of the rose is used presently by a non-profit group to mark cultural sites for protection. It's well recognized that St. Olaf, whose folktales involve battling trolls, took over many aspects of the cult of Thor after the Christianization of the Norse. He became the most significant saint and foundational figure. His feast day, July 29th, is still widely celebrated in Scandinavia. The timing is highly suspicious, as it falls exactly within the period of the major festival to the Slavic god Perun, whose worship was largely redirected into St. Elijah, whose feast day is held on August 2nd, or July 20th, depending on the calendar. This also matches the timing of Gaelic Lunasa. Iconography from Roman Gaul depicts the worship of Tyrannus under the astrological sign of Leo, in connection with the grain harvest, placing a significant period of his worship at the exact same time. Like Perun, Tyrannus, and Lugh, Thor protected the harvest as well as people from malign forces, and would have also been propitiated at the same time to avert potential destructive weather at the critical moment. A very similar symbol to St. Olaf's rose is used by many Slavic peoples, often found on the gables of old houses or on the beams of roofs. There it was known as the thunder wheel, or Perun's mark. Sometimes it is presented as a rosette, and other times more akin to a wheel, both having a very similar appearance. The seeming interchangeability between flower and wheel, almost identical to those used by Perun, is also present in Roman Britain, where the wheel and rosette are often used on altars to Jupiter, and are sometimes also found on gravestones. The reason for this is presumably to hallow the sight of the dead. Statues of the god sometimes show him holding the wheel in his hand as he crushes down a monstrous foe. In every case, the meaning is the same. It is a symbol of protective power, invoking the hallowing force of the thunder god. Instead of the hammer, the wheel is used to call to mind the power of the god, and this seems to be a nearly universal European association, possibly going back to Proto-Indo-European times. While Thor's hammer seems to be largely absent from Anglo-Saxon tradition, the symbol of the rosette does appear on early pagan Anglo-Saxon artifacts, including one that invokes Thor. Gaulish Tyrannus is etymologically connected to Thor, both names being derived from the Indo-European word for thunder, and at a stage before the divide between Celtic and Germanic, they were likely the same god. This is clear from the iconography of Tyrannus, which frequently focuses on his power to crush the malign forces. He carries both the wheel and the thunderbolt, reminding the worshipper of the symbol that many wore around their own necks as an embodiment of the god's power and protection. The wheel is likely a thunder wheel, bringing to mind the sound of thunder, but there may be an underlying solar connection as well. There is some evidence to show that Tyrannus was later interpreted as Saint Michael. Mount Saint Michael in France is the world's most important shrine to Saint Michael, but in the early Middle Ages, it was still being called by some Mount Jupiter. Saint Michael is most known for having led the battle against Satan, casting him and his legions out of heaven, and it is most likely for this reason the mountain of Jupiter was renamed for this demon-battling saint, because this was a core part of the myth and function of Tyrannus. In Thor's interaction with Odin in the Lay of Harbardr, both of their natures are compared and contrasted. Those skalds were almost always more favorable to Odin due to the nature of their profession. While Odin brags of the wars he has started or the women that he has slept with, Thor repeats time and again his exploits fighting trolls. He says that if not for him, the entire world of man would have already been overrun by them, such that nothing in the world could live. This is why Thor is called the Holy Guardian. Trolls are lurking everywhere, ready to climb into one's flesh, poisoning their blood, into their minds, disrupting their thoughts, into the crops, causing blight, into the clouds, causing drought, into the air, causing plague. Yet this nature puts him at odds at times with his father Odin, whose motivations are often portrayed as far more sinister. Both gods are sometimes connected with weather, crops, and warriors, and yet their personalities are sharply contrasted. While Thor is the friend of man, Odin is called terrible, bale worker, lord of the undead, gallows burden, lord of the earth, deceiver, masked one, and other disturbing names. He is often involved in lying and orchestrating people's deaths. The distinction is similar, perhaps, to that between Slavic Perun and Veles. The rivalry comes out in the myth of Starkathr, who is a berserker chosen by Odin. He was a descendant of a Jotun slain by Thor. In some accounts, he is born with more than 2 arms, and Thor ripped the extra ones off. While Odin loved berserkers, Thor hated them. When Odin blessed Starkathr with long life, excellent weapons, victory in battle, abundant riches, the gift of poetry, and the love of nobles, Thor curses him with impotency, criminality, susceptibility to many wounds, landlessness, insatiable greed, forgetfulness, and the hatred of common folk. From the curse, we can see that Thor likely granted the opposite of those things to those whom he favored. In other words, Thor blesses with virility, lawfulness, health, land, moderation in desire, and a sound mind and memory, and the respect of free peoples. Yet the worship of Thor was perhaps not always so nice and moderate. Dudo of St. Quintin, writing sometime in the later half of the 10th century, wrote, "Moreover, as the last act on expulsion and departure, they used formerly to make sacrifices in veneration to their god Thor. To him they offered neither gifts of sheep nor cattle, nor of Father Liber, nor of Ceres, but they used to sacrifice the blood of human victims, thinking that to be the most valuable of all offerings." Using an ox yoke, the head of a man would be bashed in. Prophecy would be obtained from his dead remains, and his blood would be smeared on the sails of the ships in order to obtain a blessed voyage. Now obviously, some will think this is an exaggeration by a Christian source, and it may well be. But if people believe that they can obtain the blessing of a god through such a sacrifice, if their lives are on the line, as they often are at sea, we should not discount the possibility. An extra ring of truth in the account can be found in the idea that the victims are sacrificed by a blow to the head, because this is nearly always the way in which Thor was imagined to kill his enemies. However, it does differ from the Roman period account of Tyrannus, which says that sacrifices were burned to death. In the funeral of Balder, Thor does kick a dwarf into the flames, and perhaps that counts. But interesting also is that Thor here, and in a few other places as well, is connected himself with prophecy, so that this was not an exclusive domain of Odin. Norse mythology knows Thor as the eldest son of Odin, born of the goddess Jörð, a name for the earth. As Odin is the Allfather, with the characteristics of the earlier Indo-European Skyfather, it's likely that this birth was seen originally as the unity of sky and earth. It symbolizes the unity of matter and spirit. While Odin is the origin of spirit, the breath of life, Thor is the unity of this spirit with the world, and he's thus more akin to a human, but also more powerful. For like man, his power manifests within the material world, and not just the spiritual realm. Of this, Saxo Grammaticus says, Ragnar therefore feared the might of no supernatural prowess, save the god Thor only, to the greatness of whose force nothing human or divine could fitly be compared. The hearts of men ought not to be terrified at phantoms, which were only awful from their ghastly foulness, and whose semblances, marked by counterfeit ghostliness, were wont for a moment to borrow materiality from the fluent air. This suggests that Thor's power is something more than a spirit. It is something physical and present in the world. In the prologue to the Prose Edda, Snorri Sturluson makes Thor the son of Memnon and a daughter of King Priam. He is fostered in Thrace by a war duke called Loricus, seemingly meaning loud, and his wife Lora, which has a similar etymology. He grows up extremely fast, mastering every skill and power. Then he kills his foster father, takes over as the king of Thrace, which was then known as Thrundheim, and went round the world battling berserkers, giants, and dragons. He has provided a long list of descendants, many of which appear as other names for Thor himself, or names of his children in other myths. Yet there may be a kernel of an earlier myth contained in Snorri's attempt to humanize. The tales of several other thunder gods also involve them being fostered or hidden away, growing immensely quickly, becoming greatly skilled, and then defeating a father or grandfather, and this seems to be the same tale retold about Thor. However, there is another legend, though not directly attributed to Thor, which is almost certainly related to ancient ideas about the god. Saxo Grammaticus relates a legend about a certain Halfdan, who is believed to be a son of Thor. He was said to be a significant ancestor of the kings of Norway, worshipped with libations after his death. His father Harold was murdered by his uncle Frode, so that the latter could obtain sole power of the kingdom of Sweden. Frode then tried to kill the two sons of his brother, Halfdan and Harold. However, their deaths were faked by their protectors, who made it look as if they were torn apart by wolves. They were then hidden in the hollow of an oak tree and fed for a long time as if they were dogs, and called hounds, so that their names would not be spoken and no one would realize they were still alive. When they grew up, they killed Frode, avenging their father, and took the rule to themselves. Harold was made a deputy ruler and remained at home, while Halfdan led the warriors. He battled against sorcerers and berserkers with his raw power, often using a club, boulders, or even an entire oak tree as his weapon. And the reason he used such blunt weapons was because magic users had the ability to dull sword blades. And this is said to be a spell taught by Odin, according to Havamal. So together with a champion called Thor, he rolled boulders down a mountain, defeating an entire army. And for the feat he was called Biagram, Strong Rock, emphasizing again the connection between Thor and the stone. He is described as being as equally skilled in poetry and the arts as he was on the battlefield and as a great king. He was a master of all the arts, one could say. But that this Halfdan was believed to be the son of Thor tells us a lot not preserved in myths about Thor. Firstly, Thor was considered by some an important ancestral figure linked to kingship, undercutting the theory that Thor was strictly a second-function warrior god, as in George Dumézil's hypothesis. Likely, he and many other ruling gods was believed by his worshippers to hold power over all three domains, a master of all, just like the idealized king. Which god ruled may have depended more on the cult of the family, who obtained political power, more than a worked-out cosmology. Indeed, Adam of Bremen implies that Thor was the ruling god during his time. The tale reinforces the connection between the thunder god and the oak tree, but it brings in an otherwise unmentioned element, a connection between hounds and a possible twin dynamic. The hound is here contrasted with the wolf. The hound is the defender of the home. The wolf is represented by the character of the berserker. Such can be seen in the Gaelic myths of Cuchulainn, the mortal son of the god Lugh, who takes upon himself the identity of the Hound of Cuchulainn, vowing to defend the homes, cattle, and borders, just like the hound did. Halfdan and his brother, raised in an oak tree as hounds, may be connected to an archaic aspect of Thor, as the progenitor of kings. Thor is the father of two sons, Magni and Mothi, meaning mighty and fierceness, and a daughter, Thrudr, meaning strength. They could be seen as offshoots or embodiments of Thor's attributes. When Thor defeats the giant Hrungnir, but the stone giant falls on top of him, trapping him, Magni lifts the stone from his father, and this could be seen as the might of Thor lifting the stone off of Thor, just personified as an external actor. It is thus significant that Magni is awarded the horse Gullfaxi, Golden Mane, the second fastest horse in the universe, which can cross land, sea, and sky. For comparison, we can look at Gaulish Tyrannus. Perhaps Thor was once also such a rider, as his name like Loud Rider or Lone Rider illustrate. Gullfaxi appears in later folktales as a magical horse ridden by heroic champions. Thor's realm is called either Thrudheim, realm of strength, or Thrudvangur, meaning field of strength, with Thrud being identical with the name of his daughter. The etymology of Thrud might perhaps be relevant here because it goes back to a Proto-Germanic word meaning to grow or thrive, and may have originally held this meaning when first associated with Thor. She may have been originally intended to represent the growing power of crops, and this may be why it's the name of his daughter, together with Sif, whom many believe to be a goddess akin to Roman Ceres. It would also help to explain why the dwarf Alvis, a figure from the underworld, tries to wed her. His home upon this plane is called Bilskirnir, which means flashing light or lightning flash. In Grimnismal it says, "There Valgrind stands, the sacred gate, and behind are the holy doors. Old is the gate, but few there are. who can tell how it tightly is locked. 500 doors and 40 there are, I ween in Valhall's walls. 800 fighters through one door fare, when to war with the wolf they go. 500 rooms and 40 there are, I ween, in Bilskirnir built. Of all the homes whose roofs I beheld, my son's the greatest, meseemed. For those interested, that is 432,000 warriors that will march from Bilskirnir, or Valhall, at Ragnarok. According to this account, the spirits of warriors seem to also reside with Thor, and Thor's abode is considered part of Valhall, or is actually used interchangeably with it, such that it's not even clear that they are separate. Probably it was thought that common folk, who are said to love Thor, dwell with him after death, and they may make up the bulk of the warriors. They are the free men, those who labor in trades, work the soil, but also those who take up arms when called. Some of his worshippers were kings as well, and it likely depended more on the social class and cult followed by the individual than a metaphysical notion. A similar idea may have existed in Ireland, where some kings were buried in connection with the abode of the Dagda, while others were not. We may not generally think of Thor as leading a massive host of spirit warriors, but similar remarks are made about Slavic Perun and Gaelic Lugh. As Grimnismal is one of our key original source texts, it seems hard to argue that the Skald was simply confused, especially when he cites one after the other as he does, with the special quality of the house having 540 rooms, which is elsewhere also said to be a quality of Thor's abode. The nature of Sif is somewhat mysterious. What is best known about her is that Loki cut off her hair. This may have been when Loki had an affair with her, which is alluded to in several places. The end result is Loki being forced to provide magical items to the gods, replacing Sif's hair with a golden wig, and gifting Thor his hammer, agreed to have been the best item possessed by the gods. The golden hair is theorized to represent the ripe ears of corn, a goddess of earthly fertility. This relation is due to the god's mastery over weather, his protection of the crops from malign forces, and possibly his vital force, which was in some way linked to crop growth. Sif's name comes from a word for being related, the root of the English word sibling, likely implying her marriage relations and perhaps the implied fertility of that union. And it's possible that her suggested affair with Loki is related to a dynamic similar to that of Persephone, part of the year the goddess of fertility dies away, along with the cutting of the grains, imagined as her hair. A very similar dynamic exists with Gaelic Lugh. His wives were said to become fruitful, but then die at harvest time. The games of the festival are in part an act of honoring their labors. Now within Thor's household it may be right to include Ullr. He was clearly a more important god than surviving myths reveal. Saxo Grammaticus said that when Odin was away, he took his place and was called Odin. This may be related to a seasonal change, as Ullr is closely connected with winter. Like Apollo, Odin may have been thought to go away for a few months during the winter period, leaving Ullr in charge. But why is Ullr called the stepson of Thor and the son of Sif? Goddesses are far more complex than simply being related to the earth and soil, and the topic cannot be fully developed here, but the bald Sif may be the crone or hag of winter, brought on by Loki, the father of Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel, and the grandfather of darkness. Sif may likewise have a dual seasonal expression, which makes her the mother of Thrudr, with Thor perhaps representing the vital force of plants, but also Ullr, whose father is ever unnamed but is linked to all things winter. His name means glory, and he is good to call on in fights, and an excellent archer, things that put him in connection with Thor. And as a stepfather or foster father, he would have been thought to have raised him and trained him in all his skills and arts. Probably Ullr also is connected with various forms of winter weather, such as snow. Now, it's worth considering what connection, if any, Thor has with the sun. Adam of Bremen said that Thor had powers not only over thunder and lightning, but also fair weather, which implies that he rules the bright sky, in which the sun has its dwelling. His horse, Gullfaxi, may have some connection with light or the sun given its name. Its construction is similar to Skinfaxi, the horse of day, and Hrimfaxi, the horse of night. Gold is often associated with the sun, and one possible explanation is that Gullfaxi represents the horse of the rays of the sun, for these rays have the power to smite down chthonic forces, which is a power governed by Thor. A possible connection with this power may be hidden in the tale Alvismal, where the dwarf Alvis seeks Thor's daughter Thrudr for his bride. Thor stalls the dwarf by asking him many questions, as his name means all-wise. However, he is not so wise that Thor cannot fool him, for he is kept answering questions until dawn, when Thor proclaims, "With great tricks I declare you tricked, dwarf. You have been dawned upon. The sun now shines into the hall." After which the dwarf is turned into stone by the powers of the sun. Like trolls in later folklore, dwarves are likewise turned to stone by the sun, and that power may be governed by Thor. Sometimes he may smite his foes with the lightning bolt, other times perhaps with sunlight, and this seems to be what is suggested in the tale of Alvismal. Although the wheel or rosette symbol linked to Perun, Tyrannus, and Thor is most likely representative of the thunder wheel, it's also possible to see in it a solar symbolism. The wheel of Tyrannus is gold, and in various kennings in Old Norse and in Gaelic poetry, the sun is referred to as a wheel. In the Bronze Age, the wheel symbol certainly appears to be solar, sometimes appearing on what is most likely a solar boat, accompanied by waterfowl. In the Rig Veda, the sun is also linked to wheels, and a story tells how the mighty Indra, the thunder god, stole a wheel from the chariot of the sun, and gave it to a mortal hero for a weapon. Might a similar idea be originally behind the wheel symbol connected to the thunder gods across Europe? Perhaps the sun wheel and the thunder wheel are not mutually exclusive ideas. The correct appearance of Thor is a topic of some discussion, especially given the rather disgusting, insulting appearance given to him in a recent video game. Yet some also complain about his golden-haired appearance in the Marvel series, believing that he was supposed to be red-haired and red-bearded. While there is no canonical appearance, as a general rule the Indo-European thunder god is thought to be handsome. In Greek tradition, Zeus often appears as a man in perhaps his early 30s. This may surprise some, but Zeus was not archaically pictured as an old man, but a man in the prime of his strength. Not only physical strength, but also political power, which was normally achieved at a mature age. Don't let his beard fool you. Yet he must always be depicted as a fully mature man, because his role in the pantheon is as the father. But in Germanic tradition, true to the original Indo-European divisions, the Sky Father and the Thunder God are kept separate. Because Thor is the son, not the father, he's not instantly thought of as having a mature appearance. Some descriptions of Thor suggest that he went about as a youth, and several times he is said to have had golden hair, but later poetry sometimes gives him red hair and a beard. Gaulish Tyrannus is at least once shown with dark hair, other times shown with golden hair. Thor is pictured on some Viking period runestones, but he is never given an explicit beard, even when other characters alongside him are shown with beards. Most young warriors would have had beards, but it depends on how young some people believed him to be. So some native depictions of Tyrannus from Roman period Gaul and Britain show him as a beardless youth. Yet the Gundestrup Cauldron shows Tyrannus with a beard. So the reality is that sometimes he had a beard, and sometimes he didn't have a beard. Sometimes he was very young, and other times he was a fatherly age. However, bearded or beardless, golden-haired or red-haired, he was not thought of as fat and ugly. Now, there is a curious connection between not only Thor and goats, but a number of gods related to thunder and rain. Zeus is raised by the goat Amalthea, according to some, and from her hide he made his shield, the aegis, and from her horn, the cornucopia. Welsh say, about whom the oak tree is said to be his temple, can only be killed while one foot is on the back of a goat. In ancient Greek, the aegis meant both stormy weather and goat hide. A celestial origin has been suggested, with Capricorn being related to stormy weather, but the star signs were not universally recognized across Europe. It is likely that an ancient rain-making ritual is involved at the heart of these connections, but how it arose and its details are murky at best. In the Rig Veda, the god Pushan, like Thor, has a chariot that is pulled by goats, and he is in close connection with Indra, where he helps him milk the cloud cows for rain. There is also a particular relationship between Loki and Thor in myth, such that Loki is often responsible for the trials and travels of the god, and sometimes acts as his traveling companion. This is perhaps best explained by Loki's alternative name, Lopter, meaning air. Air and wind are closely linked to the storm and can be seen driving the clouds. An Old English riddle suggests that air holds up the clouds from which God throws down his lightning bolts, but is bound by his master. Sometimes he is forced down into the sea and stirs it up, and sometimes he is bound and chained under the earth and causes earthquakes, but other times he escapes his bonds and speeds over the earth in massive storms. It invokes an image similar to myths of Loki. Yet there is another Loki, UtgardLoki or UtgardLoki. There is much debate what, if any, relationship there is between UtgardLoki and Loki, but it is my belief that they are the same figure, later confused, like Odin and Other. UtgardLoki simply means Loki of the Outlands, simply referring to Loki who has been expelled from Asgard and dwells now in the Outlands, the furthest realm of Jotunheim. Saxo Grammaticus also mentions UtgardLoki. The champion Thorkill is asked by King Gorm to bring him to the place of Geirrodr. Thorkill takes them on what is a journey into the underworld, located in the north. They find Geirrodr's body, and Thorkill explained, "Long ago, the god Thor had been provoked by the insolence of the giants to drive red-hot irons through the vitals of Geirrodr, who strove with him, and that the iron had slid further, torn up the mountain, and battered through its side, while the women had been stricken by the might of his thunderbolts. When they are going back, they are hit by bad weather, and the king offers vows and peace offerings to UtgardLoki, obtaining the fair weather that he prayed for. After they are back home, men seeking Thorkill's death convince the king to send Thorkill to find UtgardLoki. They travel to a land devoid of stars and sun and light, and they begin to starve by the time they reach their destination. Finally, he finds the cave where UtgardLoki is. He is bound in fetters. Thorkill pulls a single beard hair to prove his deed, but the poison spews out and kills most of his crew. And we learn from this that UtgardLoki was believed to have some control over weather, that he may have been worshipped by some, and that he is chained up in the exact same manner as Loki is said to have been. Given that they have the same name, and that they are found in the same kind of bound situation at the end of the earth, they likely are the same. In Snorri's account, when Thor first meets UtgardLoki, he goes by the name Skrymir, though in Old Norse it means boaster. A deeper meaning of the word seems to imply taking up space, which is what air does. He sleeps beneath an oak tree, and Thor tries to smite him with his hammer 3 times, to no effect. A very similar myth exists in Russian concerning Saint Ilya Muromets, who is thought by some to also be linked to myths of Perun. When the young champion first sets out, he comes across a sleeping giant, Svatagor. In some versions, he feels frightened and hides in an oak tree. He then comes down and strikes the sleeping giant 3 times with his mace, but the giant doesn't even stir from the blows. And he then ends up in the giant's pocket, much like Thor ends up in Skrymir's glove. The two travel together for a time, but the giant Svatagor ends up entombed in stone, but bestows some of his powers upon Ilya. In the trials set before Thor by UtgardLoki, the god must drink the sea, causing the tide to flow out. He then must lift Jormungandr, the encircling ocean, causing the tide to flow back in. And then he wrestles old age, representing the energetic power of life itself, possibly related to Thrud discussed earlier. It isn't so much a test as it is a myth to explain how Thor is responsible for these things. It also expresses an important idea. Though Thor is the mightiest of the gods, even he is not capable of certain things. The world is ordered, and the gods work within that order, but do not go beyond it. They are part of the world like men, and like men, they also have their own fates. Thor is fated to face off in a final struggle with the Midgard serpent at Ragnarok. The serpent is rightly traced back by many to the Indo-European water-withholding dragon. Like Greek Okeanos, he was imagined as a serpent and a river that encircles the outer edge of the world, from which waters are distributed to the rest of the earth. Thor is often found in his tales contesting with the sea. This is best expressed in Thorsdrapa. The promoter of the whetstone land let the mighty swollen ones fall over him. The man who benefited from the girdle of might knew no better course of action. The diminisher of Morn's children threatened that his power would grow onto the hall's roof unless the gushing blood of Thorn's neck would diminish. The glorious battle-wise warriors, oath-sworn Vikings of Gautri's dwelling, waded hard while the sword fen flowed. The wave of the earth's snow dune, blown by the tempest, rushed forcefully at the increaser of the distress of the room-dwellers of the land of the ridge, until Thialfi, accompanying the friend of men, flew into the air of his own accord, under the Sky Lord's shield strap. That was a great feat of strength. The windows of the Mimir of Mischief caused a violent stream, strident with steel. Grither's toppler carried the battle tree across the bumpy land of the Porpoise. Now, if it was hard to make sense out of that, I suggest going back and watching, because I add in, effectively, translations to what these kennings mean. But this is a taste of what Old Norse and Old English poetry was really like. Riddles within riddles. Thor is sometimes called a helmsman, and he is often pictured crossing over the sea and water. He is said to wade the waters of Kormt and Ormt and the Karlogs every day on his way to Yggdrasil. Jormungandr is referred to in Thor's drapa as the sea thread, because he is the serpent which dwells in the world-encircling sea, and seems to have had control over waters. In the myth where Thor and Tyr set off to acquire a kettle a mile deep that can serve the gods drinks, before Thor can get the cauldron, he must deliver a smiting blow to the serpent. Possibly the kettle is related to the flow of waters, which Tyr is connected to also, but requires the force of the thunder god in order to secure. Perhaps it is the water in the clouds brought from the sea, which Thor afterwards must bear upon his back home. In the account he puts it over his head like a helmet, which extends past his shoulders. And the humorous point here is that the word used means both kettle and helmet. The waves of the sea are called the windows of the mischief mimirs, meaning trolls. The sea is thought here as the home of the trolls who look out from beneath the waves like one looks out the windows of their home. Thor's weird, his fate, is to be overcome by Jormungandr in the end. Völuspá says, Hrimir drives from the east, lifts his shield in front of him. Jormungandr writhes in Jotun fury. The serpent churns the waves, and the eagle screams. Pitch dark pale rends corpses. Naglfar casts off. So here Jormungandr is seen to be causing storm waves, which form part of the assault against Middle-earth. It continues a bit later, saying, Then comes the great offspring of Hlodin. Odin's son goes to attack the serpent. He strikes in fury. Midgard's Hallower. All humans will clear out of their homesteads. 9 paces fares the son of Fjorgyn, and slain by the serpent, fearless he sinks. The sun turns black. Earth sinks into the sea. The hot stars down from the heavens are whirled. While translations differ, the meaning that appears behind this is that Jormungandr stirs up the seas, which finally overwhelm Thor, killing him, causing him to sink beneath their waves, along with the earth. The short Völuspá explains it this way. The sea, storm-driven, seeks heaven itself. Over the earth it flows, the air grows sterile. Then follow the snows and the furious winds, for the gods are doomed, and the end is death. One there was born, best of all, and strong he was made with the strength of the earth. The proudest is called the kinsman of men, of rulers all throughout the world. While it does not specifically say Thor by name, it does seem to be speaking of Thor, mentioning that he was made with the strength of the earth, Jord being the mother of Thor, and kinsman of men is very much akin to friend of man, which Thor is frequently called. It implies that Thor is overwhelmed by the waters. While the circumstances are different, there does seem to be a reoccurring theme with some other gods. In the death tales of the Gaelic gods, Lugh is said to fall beneath the waves. When the statue of Perun was cast down upon the Rus's conversion to Christianity, it was thrown into the river to drown him. It appears to be based on an irony that the god attached to the control of the flowing waters is ultimately overwhelmed by them. While called the Thunderer, the powers of Thor extend far beyond storms. He was first above all else, the warrior against the evil forces, a god who turns back the trolls and protects man from their malign influences. He protects the home, the family, and the nation with his hallowing power. His strength brings healing and growth, ends plagues and droughts, and brings abundance to the fields. His blessing is fair weather, and with his storms he both battles trolls and punishes those who have displeased him with ruined crops. Yet this weather function becomes almost secondary. Odin also controls the weather and seasons, and was sacrificed to for a successful harvest. Freyr brought sunshine and rain, and Njordr is also linked to weather. Yet it is Thor alone who wields the thunderbolt. Thor, who possesses the power to defeat the Jotnar. Thor, who uses his unconquerable might to safeguard the realm of men. Without that holy warder, the friend of man, not a thing in this Middle-earth would survive. When he falls, the world will sink beneath the waves. May that day be long in coming. I hope you all found this video interesting, and if you did, please like, subscribe, and consider supporting the channel through Patreon, PayPal, or Super Stickers on YouTube. Thank you all for your support and your time, and as always, stand tall.